Welcome back, everybody. This tutorial is on the 11th Company Inquisitor, which is a 40k theme piece for the 11th Company podcast. It's a Warhammer 40k podcast. This painting is in no way Games Workshop official, unlike some of my Fantasy Flight Games work. This was a private commission. As you can see, I'm using Adobe Photoshop. I'm using CS5 in this, CS4 in this case. I'm using a Wacom Cintiq 21UX, not a tablet nor a mouse. I think the resolution is something around 8.5 by 11 at 300 DPI or 600 DPI. And I think those are the basics, which most people ask right away, and it's also always in the video description. As you can see, this was captured from the live stream, so you can see that there's a video recording of my face. Oh, and there's my dog. And right now I'm just gathering reference. I do live streams every Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at twitch.tv/NicholasK. And there will be a link to that in the video description. So I'm still collecting reference. Collecting reference is actually one of the most important parts of my process. I always like to collect reference just so that I have things that I can look to if I need inspiration, or if I need a model type of if we're trying to figure out the lighting situation, I can see how the object is actually formed, where the light falls on it, where the transparencies might be, where the details will be, and whatnot. Also, I can just kind of grab design elements here and there if I need to. So normally before I do any paintings, I will create a reference sheet like this. And it's usually just 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 8.5 or whatever. The size makes no difference. It's whatever is useful. And I'll just grab some photos off Google, or if I have some photos that are sent to me by my client, or if I have a camera and I have some reference photos that I've taken myself, I'll use those. But there's all different types of stuff. Anyway, let's get started. So apparently I'm still gathering reference. It looks like I needed a lot, and that's true. I had to find reference for her armor, weapons, and clothing, in addition to reference for the pose. In the end, we actually used I think it was a cosplayer dressed as Lara Croft. We altered the pose quite a bit, but we did use it as a general guidance. Okay, so let's start the actual painting. So what I did in this case was I sort of just threw down some gradients. This was originally commissioned to just be a single character. There wasn't supposed to be a background, but that changed. The client really liked how things were turning out, so they actually upped the budget and wanted a small, quick background included. Now, as you can see, I'm not sketching using line, I'm sketching using values in this case. So I have this kind of reddish, almost clay color I'm using. And I immediately start throwing forms on top of it using values. So here I'm using lighter values to try to help define the shapes that are going to be found on this character. And I'm just using the default #1 brush. I get a lot of questions on that. I use the standard brush most of the time, just the #1 round brush with a hard edge. Sometimes use a softer edge if I'm doing softer stuff, like if I'm doing a background or whatever. Female characters tend to need softer brushes than male characters, but we can talk about that another time. So I'm still just doing sketch work here. I am doing a little bit of line, just to help define some of these armor plates on her outfit. And I have a reference sheet off the screen because I have a double screen system. But as you can see, I'm sort of just spitballing here with the armor design. I'm kind of just figuring out things as I go. And definitely fixing that foot, because that foot made her look like she was broken. Guess we're taking a quick break. Sometimes that happens in the live stream. Once again, you can watch the live stream every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a good time, so I highly suggest you watch it if you are able to do so. And we're back. Oh, looks like I had to get a lollipop or something. Okay, so now we're back to the painting. Let's see what happens next. Alright, so I started working on the character design a bit more. In this case, I gave her two kind of silver needles, or stakes. They're sort of not badges of office necessarily, but one of the favored tools of the Ordo Hereticus, which is in Warhammer 40k lore, the witch hunting branch of the Inquisition. They seek out rogue psychers, or rogue people with psychic abilities. And the reason they carry silver stakes is that they're good for killing psychic people, I guess. You can stab them, they combust or whatever. Okay, so you can see I'm working on this face now, and I'm still really just using tones. You know, you can do a lot without actually using line. I found, at least, that I really like to use tones rather than get, as I like to call it, getting married to the line work. If I start doing line work, I'm going to be reluctant to change it, and eventually I'll have to paint over it anyway. So I tend to use a lot of tonal work rather than actual line work. Sometimes clients do request line work, which I'm happy to oblige, but I actually prefer to do it in a more painterly way. And as you can see, I'm using normal layers. I'm not using any fancy layer types yet. If you are curious about different layer types, I have a tutorial on that. You can go to my channel to find it. It'll be under the Photoshop tutorials. I think it's called Layer Blend Mode tutorial. But I cover all the different layer modes and how they're used, or at least how I use them. Alright, so faces, without good reference, faces are very difficult, but with good reference, they really should not be that difficult to do. Sometimes there are certain expressions that are hard to find reference for, so you sort of have to interpolate or create your own, and just sort of figure out as you go. But generally speaking, what you really want to pay attention to is where the brights and the darks fall on the face, because those will really help determine for your viewer what is going on. As you can see, I really quickly threw an overlay layer on that, and that was mostly just to adjust the color of her skin. It was just a little bit too reddish. It looked kind of like, I don't know, like an ochre color rather than a flesh tone. Okay, here we're doing the hair, and the hair I'm really doing quickly. As you can tell, I'm using normal layers, just the round brush, and I'm just sort of knocking in, I think it's Betty Page. It's kind of like this Betty Page style of haircut. And just refining some of the details on the face. I notice how I'm keeping a lot of things on the face, a lot of the details, pretty soft, kind of loose. There are some kind of harsh lines around like the edges of the eye and underside of the nose, and maybe some of the lipstick on her face, but a lot of it's very sort of tame, and I found that works very well on faces. It's okay to render some parts out, but you know, I don't know, I think that if you render it too much, you start showing wrinkles, and you start adding creases that really wouldn't be visible and stuff like that, so I try to keep it kind of loose. Right now I'm using the Liquify Tool. Why am I using the Liquify Tool? Well, I flipped the composition just to see how things worked. When you flip a composition, your brain sort of resets the painting in its estimation, so you can look at something with fresh eyes. When I flipped the painting, I found that the face was very asymmetric, so I used the Liquify Tool to edit it. And that way I don't have to repaint from scratch. I can just sort of push and smush stuff around and make it work. Okay, doing some ears. Ears are pretty simple, actually, if you have good reference. It's really just a flap of skin that hangs off the face, or the side of the head with an overhang. And you know, there's a couple little lumpy parts that stick off, but it's really not that much. Also, the outer portion of the ear is called the pinna, P-I-N-N-A. It's the anatomical term for that. And then there are multiple subparts, but you can look those up if you're interested. Alright, at this point I decided it was time to fix the hair. I didn't really like the double bun, so I just sort of gave her a standard kind of, what's the word, kind of like a bob cut haircut, which is really common in Warhammer 40k for female characters, especially those who are associated with the Sisters of Battle, which are elements of the Order Hereticus. So yeah, all very canon. And here we're just doing a little bit of highlight work, still using normal layers. And you can notice that my palette, once I start working, is usually done using the eyedropper tool. So I will sample other parts of my painting to get colors I need. And part of the reason I do that is that it's quick, but another reason I do it is that it helps me maintain sort of some uniformity to the work. There aren't too many like high highs and low lows. Everything's sort of, not that contrast is bad, but it just keeps my palette sort of coordinated that way if I use the eyedropper tool versus just going to the color picker and grabbing a color and making something up. Also, if I need to adjust things, then they'll be if I need to adjust things later, they'll be uniformly adjusted. So, you know, if I have everything that's sort of mundane, kind of you know, low contrast, and then I bump up the contrast later, everything will get uniformly bumped up. Whereas if I have, you know, half my painting done kind of blandly, and then I kind of fix it at the end in certain parts, but not everywhere, if I try to bump up the contrast, it won't be uniformly done. You'll have blown out portions which are too dark or too bright. Alright, so we're doing some work on the corset here and the brassiere. Sort of interesting thing that happens to me is whenever I work on a painting, I tend to detail the face for a bit, and as I detail it, the face actually becomes smaller. I'm not sure why this happens, but as I paint faces, they always tend to shrink. So I constantly have to, once I've, you know, done some work on a face, I'll have to use the Lasso Tool and expand that face because it'll become too small compared to the rest of the body. Like I said, I don't know why that happens. It's just this kind of weird quirk I have, I guess, when I paint. And we gave her a lovely tattoo, but this actually goes bye-bye for a while, I think. Yeah. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. This is also a perk of using the layers. Some artists, you know, refuse to use layers and they just do everything on one layer. That's fine, but that's really not taking advantage of the system that's available. I used to use a lot more layers than I do now. Now when I use layers, it's really just sort of benchmarks for incremental adjustments. So if I feel like I'm going to make a major overhaul to the painting, I'll just make a new layer and do it on that, because if I don't like it, I can't really go back. I'd have to do an iterative save, which I do anyway, but you know, you only have so many history settings or history states that you can load without blowing out your computer's RAM. But I just find doing it on layers is easier. It's just the easiest way to do it. So if you need to use layers, use layers. There's no shame in using layers, and people who say that, you know, using layers, whatever, are dumb. They don't know what they're talking about. Because believe it or not, it actually does come up. People say that using layers means that you're not as good as an artist or whatever. Alright, so we're doing some metal work here. When you're doing metal, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. The primary concern you should have with metal is form. Just with any other lighting, but it's really, really important with metal, because metal is generally fairly reflective, so it will show what's around itself and the environment and, you know, localized objects. So if you're wearing like a very polished mirrored breastplate or something, that breastplate will actually reflect the rest of your character on it. You know, their arm, if their arm is extended, will be visible. It will be bounced back onto the breastplate, just for example. So when you work with metals, you always have to be constantly, in the back of your head anyway, thinking about what the metal is facing and what might be reflected or how it will be reflected in the actual surface, which can actually be a little bit straining. So sometimes it's really just easier to fudge it or kind of just knock in the shapes first and then worry about that. But I like to sort of play these kind of games where I'll look at it and I'll try to figure out what would be reflecting, what wouldn't, where it would be reflecting from, the faces that would be reflecting, etc., etc. So that kind of stuff is important, and it really does take your painting to the next level if you can accurately depict the surroundings of your character. Okay, so we're using a little bit of kind of rim light here to help isolate the character. And she's got this nice giant collar with kind of golden buttons that are skull shaped. And as you just saw, the buttons did not take very long. They're essentially a black dot with two bands on it. And your brain can kind of interpolate the rest. It'll figure out what's supposed to be there. So believe it or not, you can get away with very simple brush strokes for very complex shapes if you just know where the highlights would fall or how the shape would render at certain sizes. Here you can see I'm doing the armor. Actually, can't remember what part of that would be called. I guess it's not really the vambrace, but anyway, that part of the armor is very easy to depict if it's smooth, and you can see how I did that. Think of it as a reflective surface. In this case, it's a cylinder. So the top of it, which is facing the light source, will have a strong highlight, and then the highlight will fade, which leads to the terminator, which is the area where the shadow begins, really. And then below the terminator, you have a bounce highlight, which comes from the environment. In this case, it's yellow because we have a yellow background. So that's sort of how I map out things when I work. And you can see that same pattern is carried through on the breasts and on the shoulder pad, and it'll get carried through the rest of the painting too. So just keep an eye out for that. Okay, we've got some lovely textures going on the. I guess it's a pauldron. I don't think it's actually a pauldron, because pauldrons go underneath the shoulder plate. But anyway, she's got some nice details going on her shoulder guard. And we're sort of just hinting at under armor. There's sort of like a webbing beneath the armor plates. And all I'm doing is I'm just sort of depicting where the highlights would fall. I'm not going to go in and make all the brush strokes for all the valleys and whatever. I'm just going to kind of hint at it. It's a good way to save time. It's a good way to keep your painting looking painterly. And it gets the job done. That's the most important. The most important part is just to get the job done. I'm going to throw an inquisitorial emblem there, just to sort of help make her look imperial and Inquisition. And we're building up some armor around the breasts as well, because it's kind of awkward just to have these spheroids just like popping off the breastplate without anything surrounding them, sort of bracing the design. It's just very weird. So that's what we're doing here. And she's got sort of a corset design on her armor. Very, very common in the Warhammer 40k universe of female characters to have sort of corset designs. Partly because it's a game, which the audience is kind of guys, so guys like that. But also, it sort of makes sense. Warhammer 40k has this very medieval Gothic element to it, and that's sort of a design element from that period. So it does get translated fairly well onto the characters in 40k. But either way, it's a fun design. And because I do a lot of 40k work, it's something I've had to become very comfortable doing. Okay, time to do some work on the gauntlet here. So gauntlets can be either a nightmare or extremely fun to paint. It depends how good your reference is, of course, I always say that. How good your reference is, and kind of how strong your design is. So a really well designed gauntlet is going to look awesome. It's going to be fun to paint. It's going to look sweet. It's going to work with the anatomy. It's going to work with the pose. If you don't get your initial design knocked out correctly, you're going to not have a good time. You're not going to be enjoying yourself. So that's one of the areas where you really have to work really hard before you go too crazy. And notice how I'm working on everything but the hand. I sort of have a hand pose sketched in, but I'm really not spending a lot of time on it with all the highlights and stuff until I make sure that it works. I'm zoomed in too much. Okay, so now I'm going to continue working on the wrist and the fan brace, and see, I'm keeping away from the gauntlet. I'm not really committing yet. I'm doing all these other details and doodads and stuff. And there we go. I had to go find some reference. And even though I don't have necessarily a gauntlet in that pose, this reference will work because it's giving me enough of a clue of how a gauntlet would look and how it's built that I can work from that design and sort of figure out how it would look. So once again, reference is not about copying one-to-one. It's not about tracing. It's about using it as a guide. It's not your ultimate product. So have good reference available, and trust your reference, but at the same time, you can't overly rely on it. You have to be able to interpolate and figure things out and sort of project how something would look based on reference. That's how you can tell if someone's a good artist or not, by whether they can do that or whether their paintings look like it's just a photo manipulation. If just stuff, jammed together, then you can tell that they're very literally translating the reference rather than trying to make something from it. Okay, so we just gave her this nice big curved kind of cutlass sword or something. And she's got this really sweet belt buckle, which is a skull on this highly polished metal. And you can see how I'm covering, or not covering, but I'm carrying through that lighting from everything else. Notice how we have got that light source up to the top right, then we have the Terminator, and then we have a bounce below. That's going to be carried through everywhere, and that's called consistent lighting. If you don't have consistent lighting, it's a dead giveaway that something is wrong. Even someone who's not trained as an artist will notice it, because you look at the real world all the time and you notice when things, or how things look when they're naturally lit, and if something is wrong or looks like it wouldn't appear the way it does in the real world, you will instantly notice. There are a couple things like that. Anatomy is one of them, where people know what humans look like even if they can't draw it. Right? If you look at a painting and the anatomy's off, you'll know it's off. Even if you could never tell me what the parts of the face are, or the different muscles, or whatever, you'll just know. You'll say, all right, well, I've been looking at people's faces for a very long time, and I can tell you that's not what a face looks like. Same thing goes for lighting and volume and perspective, because you see this stuff every day, right? You look out your window, you're seeing things in perspective, you're seeing things in the real world in 3D space, that's perspective. And you're obviously aware of volumes. So those are things you have to be very careful with, because even people who don't necessarily know how to explain what they're saying or don't have the training, they still can detect when it's wrong. What I was just doing there was I was using a drop shadow layer. I've actually kind of fallen in love with drop shadow layers lately. Or, sorry, not drop shadow layers. Drop shadow effects on layers. And it's sort of a really cheesy effect that's normally used for like bad graphic design layouts where they want font with a drop shadow, make it look 3D. But the way I use it is that I kind of manipulate it to make my designs pop out. And pretty much the sole reason I do it is because it saves me time. So I could do all these designs, and I could go in with another layer and do little shadows, paint little shadows underneath all my designs. It's just faster to use a drop shadow, so that's why I use it. And if you know how to use drop shadow correctly, you can actually achieve some pretty neat effects with it. Okay, looks like I was taking a break. That was a quick one. back to work. So you can see I did a little bit of work on her tabard. I'm actually not sure what I used for reference there. I think I used just like the actual pose reference. She was wearing a pair of khaki shorts, and I just sort of transcribed that on and kind of did a little extra work to make it look like it was longer and looser than the actual pair of shorts were. Just got a cool skull knee pad, because why not? In 40K, you're not doing it right unless there are skulls. Now you can see how I use colors and the brush to blend here. What I do is I'll make a strong stroke along the highlight, and then using the eyedropper and like a 20 to 40% opacity brush, I will just sort of do little blends. I'll just keep sampling and blending, and I'll work my way out like a gradient. And I've found that to be an extremely useful system. Alright, so now we're going to do a little bit of armor design. She's got sort of these segmented pants. I don't know what part of the armor that would be. It's a thigh protector, I guess, but kind of a neat design. Kind of like a little bit like insect-like or something almost. Or like a serpent. And we do a little spot highlights there to sort of make the edge kind of pop out a little bit. And of course, these have to be in line with the lighting scheme for the painting. The lighting has to stay consistent, always. Okay, I'm just doing a little bit of a shadow there, and then a little bit of a bounce beneath it, as you can see. Just like the arm guard. Notice how they're going to look very similar in terms of highlights and shadows. I cannot stress how important consistent lighting is. I could say it 1,000 times, it would not be stressed enough. Alright, so further adding some shadows. A little bit of a diffuse glow for that rim light effect around the edge. We want it to look like there's a light source behind her, kind of silhouetting her. Okay, lovely. Adding some little rivety studs to the armor design. Nice and simple. They're really just dots with a dot on top. That's all it is. And we're adding in that tabard, or kind of loinclothy thing going on. And right now I'm just worrying about the shape. I'm not really concerned about the details of the cloth yet. We'll figure that out. You know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, type of a thing. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of work on her boots and stuff. And notice how I kind of always go back and revise my designs. That's totally fine. It's the end product that matters. So you might have a really beautiful concept to begin with, but if it doesn't work for what you want to do, you have to be ready to go and fix it or change it if need be. And these boots were fun to do. I've mentioned this in other tutorials, but I've done a lot of paintings of shoes, strangely. So I've gotten very comfortable doing them. And at this point it's almost like relaxing to work on them because they're so easy to do now. And what's actually really ironic is that originally I hated doing shoes. I could not do them to save my life. But at this point, you know, I've just done so many of them. It's sort of grown on me. Now, with that said, please do not send me 1,000 emails asking me to paint shoes, because that would make me go insane. But I don't mind doing them every once in a while. Especially if it's for, you know, if it's not the whole point. I don't want to just paint a shoe. I like painting characters who have cool-looking shoes, but I don't want to just be painting shoes. I've actually done that for commissions in the past, and it gets it definitely wears on you. Fun facts about me you did not know. Also, notice how freely I use the Lasso Tool and Transform Tool. It's all about what it looks like at the end. I do not care if something looked okay. I need it to look perfect. So I will change things, even things that I've worked on for a while, and paint over them and repaint them if need be, to make sure they work. There's no sacrifice too great to ensure that a painting looks right and makes the client happy. Also, that should be one of your primary concerns if you're a freelancer, because an unhappy client is very unlikely to use you again in the future. You want them to be happy. You want them to have had a good time working with you. You want them to ideally be happy with the price they paid. It's not always possible, but you can try. But yes, quality is always important, so that comes first. So, for example, you know, I might have a painting, and I'm not really happy with the budget that they gave me, and the reason that is you know, when you break down the number of hours it takes to do a painting, you divide the price by the number of hours. You're figuring out how many dollars you're making per hour, right? So you have to be able to value how much your time is worth to you as well as other clients potentially. So like if I have one client who pays really well and then I have another client who doesn't pay so great, I'm going to be less inclined to do the cheaper work because I could be making more doing the other work. And every minute I spend working on the client who doesn't pay as well, I'm taking away time that I could be spending working for the client who pays much better. And you know, since everyone has deadlines and stuff, taking time away or spending extra time on something that's not going to be really paying you that much kind of stinks. But once again, I would never put my name or my signature on something I wasn't happy showing everybody. So I kind of get stuck in this little quagmire where I'm not happy with the amount I'm making because I'm spending too many hours on a piece, but at the same time I'm not willing to mail a piece in unless it's perfect, or at least I can't do a better job than I have up to that point. That's actually part of the reason it's really important to have a very tight, clean portfolio. So when an art director looks at your portfolio, they're not necessarily looking at your best piece. Now, your best piece is really important because that shows what you can do. However, your worst piece in your portfolio is even more telling. Now, you'd say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because I'm probably going to be doing my best all the time. Will you? That's the problem. Art directors have to be willing to accept that if they do a piece with, if they commission you to do a painting, they might get your worst piece that day. You might be having an off day. You might not love the subject matter. It might be a rush job. Who knows? But they might get whatever is the worst thing on your portfolio page. So ultimately, you're only as good as your worst piece. So when you have a portfolio, you kind of want to weed out the stuff that's not so hot, because that means that on a bad day, the art director might get that from you, and they might be less inclined to hire you. Now, at the same time, you know, if you are working with clients who have a budget of a couple $100 or something, you know, like a kind of small budget or something, and you have paintings on your portfolio that are, you know, all several $1,000 paintings or whatever, you know, things that you spent months working on maybe, you have to let them know that those paintings cost a lot more than what they're going to be getting, because they might have unrealistic expectations. So communication is very important with art directors to make sure that no one's disappointed or upset. Because you really, whatever happens, you do not want your art director getting upset with you. You want to make their job as easy as possible, otherwise they're not going to want to work with you in the future. So, be nice. Be easy to work with, do good work, and hopefully be affordable. Okay, so we just got this cool plasma pistol thrown in there. As you can see, that didn't really take that long to do. Why? Because I'm really just worrying about the highlights and the shadows. Some of the other details I knocked in there kind of last minute, but it gets the point across. It's a plasma pistol, looks good. Alright, now we gotta create the sister set of armor, the van brace on the other side. And we're actually taking some creative design liberties here. You know, it's not a really one-to-one bracelet design. There are some differences, but it's still cool. It has that same general appearance of the spikes and whatever. Oh, here's another good use of drop shadow. Rather than using a shadow, you can actually drop a highlight and make it look like you have something engraved into an object. Okay, there we have a gold-plated or silver-plated skull. Very fast to do, very easy to do. Why? Because, well, one, I have good reference. I have a skull sitting on my desk at all times because I do so many paintings of skulls that I need it. And two, I'm just worried about the highlights and keeping my lighting consistent. And as long as I keep those in mind, it's going to work out fine. And I did take some liberties on the stake, because I think normally they're just supposed to be like a straight piece of steel or silver. But I kind of wanted it to have sort of a sci-fi feel, so I added those red lights to it. I love painting skulls. Which is good, because if I didn't, I'd probably not enjoy my job so much. Paint a lot of skulls. And there's some continuity in design here. Okay, time to work on the sword. You will notice I'm using a layer mask here. Why am I using a layer mask? Well, I don't want that highlight to go anywhere except where I specifically want it. It's very difficult when I have a long, straight, curved edge like that to keep that edge perfect when I'm working on it. So what I do is I will select part of it and then do a layer mask, and then I know I'll never exceed the area I want to be painting. It's a very useful trick. Also notice how I'm using reflections of her armor on the blade to make it look like a mirrored surface. Very important. I'm actually very happy with the way the sword turned out. The blade itself and the metal in this painting, I think, turned out really well. They look very reflective and very natural, which is you should be your goal. And there's that tattoo. It's back. Left it on a layer. Just turned off the layer for a while. Brought it back. Purity seals. So purity seals are really easy to do if you have a technique for it, which is that I make some squiggly lines, and then I use a layer mask, and I paint out areas of the purity seal I don't want. So the point is to make it look like it's a very thin piece of parchment, right? So I make it look thin, I add some tattered edges and whatnot. And then what I do is I lock the pixels, which you can see is that little checkered square in the layer menu. And that way I only paint in the area that already has pixels on it in that layer. And that way I can do highlights and shadows very quickly without worrying about spilling over or messing up. And notice how now I'm doing localized shadows cast by the purity seals. Those are very important because they make it look like they're popping off the armor and they're in 3D space. Now for the actual seal or the wax part, that's just a red blob, which then is given a localized shadow, and then it's given some shadows and highlights to make it look like it's wax. Remember, wax is very reflective, so it'll have very high specular highlights, which are very hot highlights, versus a more matte surface like cloth has a very kind of low specular highlight. You know, very reflective or wet things have a high specular highlight. And then lastly, I'll do some text scrawled on it because that's just canon. It's just what purity seals look like. And then you're done. That's a purity seal. And I usually do them in one fell swoop in like a couple I do them all at once. Here are some adjustment layers. This is vibrance and brightness contrast layers to make it saturated but not oversaturated, and contrast or contrasted but not blown out. And then we add this nice inquisitorial neck piece here to further hearken to the fact that she is inquisitorial. Inquisitors like to wear a lot of bling. And you can see there's a little reflective highlight from the cross. Lastly, I'm doing some color dodge highlights, just using a gradient with a dark blue color to give it kind of cool highlights. And that is something I'm embarrassed to admit is a really dirty trick I showed people in the live stream how to use. It's called Chromatic Aberration. It's a lens distortion effect in the filters menu, and that is a this is at the point where I was just showing people terrible rendering tools and how to use them, but that's a lens flare, which is one of the worst. It's so overused. Anyway, I sent this in for feedback. The client liked it, but people were saying that she looked too much like a dark Eldar, not enough like a human. So I made some changes to the face, as you can see. I gave her some streaks in her hair, and I warmed up her skin and made her ear a little bit smaller, but the client still wanted her to be kind of like a little bit prettier, and not smiling. He wanted her to be more serious. So smiles are not just in the mouth; they're in the eyes as well. Sometimes they can be in the nose. And as you can see, I'm kind of fixing one side at a time, so that you can see how I would change the face. And it actually doesn't take very long. All you have to do is sort of expand the eyes, lower the corners of the mouth, and that's a really cheaty way to do it too. Is just copy and paste, flip it. So yeah, that's an easy way to do it. And now we have a very serious looking woman. She does not look like she's playing around anymore. I also just wanted to give her more stuff, so we're going to be adding some just like random doodads. That's kind of like a power generator on her sword to make it look like it's a power sword versus just a big piece of metal. And there's power swords always have kind of these like circuits running down their lengths, so that's the circuit. Okay. So, when in doubt, add chains. Chains always look cool, at least on inquisitorial people and stuff. You don't want to throw them on any character. But in the case of 40k and Inquisitors or Imperial people in general, chains usually look pretty good. Chaos as well. They tend to work pretty well. Especially if you're adding little trinkets or whatever. They look good on a chain. Now, I fooled around with a shoulder-mounted cannon, which are actually pretty common in Inquisitor, which is a 40k based game, but it didn't quite look right, so unfortunately you're going to see me work on it for a little bit and then ditch it, because I just didn't like the way it was going. And this is why I work on separate layers occasionally, because now I can just turn this off and on and see if I like it or not, and I don't have to worry about painting it out if I mess it up. So yeah, I fooled around with a couple designs on the shoulder cannon, and nothing really seemed to speak to me, so it's going to chill there for a few minutes, and then it's going to go bye-bye. Yeah, I tried a whole bunch of designs, and nothing really quite worked. I think it was just like too awkward and small. Alright. Something else that the client wanted was to kind of weigh her down a bit. She seems too sprightly. So a good way to weigh a character down is with heavy clothing. In this case, Inquisitors are known for wearing these kind of like petticoats or waistcoats. So I just kind of threw some clothing on her, and voila, she looks a bit heavier and less less sprightly. Now, you'll notice that I just painted over that icon and I'm now painting it again. Why did I do that? Well, the reason I did that was because I needed the icon to stand out. The icon was dark before and I needed her clothes to be dark, so I had to inverse their relationship and make the icon bright. It makes sense. It's pretty much just a contrast. You can't have a dark object on a dark background, otherwise you're not going to have any contrast. You need a bright on a dark and a dark on a bright or whatever. So that's why I inverted their relationship of dark to bright, bright to dark. And then here's some more clothing from behind, kind of swaying behind her. And some more purity seals never hurt. These ones I kind of did very quickly. I didn't go through the whole routine of layers. I just sort of knocked them in and hinted at them more than anything else. And here I'm adding some aerial perspective to the clothing to help make it pop and give it depth. And some more armor design just to sort of make her look more inquisitorial. Inquisitorial and imperial people tend to be very over-decorated, so they've got kind of like Baroque designs with little saints and skulls and angels and cherubs and whatever. So if you want something to look inquisitorial or imperial, just bling it out. Also, another way to make somebody look heavier and less sprightly is to literally distort them and transform them, making them wider. People who are wider seem less agile. Now, there is one thing you have to watch out for if you're going to do that, which is that I don't know if you've ever had like if you're, if the sun is shining on you and you lift your hand up, and you notice that if the sun is at a low angle anyway, you'll have your hand facing one way and your shadow looks one way, and then you twist your hand to the side, and all of a sudden it's very thick or very elongated looking, and that has to do with the way that the light is hitting your hand and the way the shadow is being cast. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, if you distort something which is vertical in a horizontal fashion, so if you have her standing standing straight, and you distort her to make her wider, she's only going to get a little bit wider. However, her arm, which is already in a horizontal position, if you make that wider, it's going to get dramatically wider. So you have to be conscious of this when you make alterations, that some things will get distorted if you're not careful, more than other parts, or more than you intended. Right now, painting in a very quick kind of tome hanging from a chain. Once again, I'm really just thinking about the volumes here. I'm just making a rectangular prism, and that's it. Kind of hint that there's pages and chains and whatnot, but it's really not that complicated. And here we have some more purity seals, because there's really no reason to explain it, just because. Easy to do. Oh, something else is important. When you're doing paper or parchment, make sure to show some of them twisting, because otherwise people are going to think it looks like a big thick string or something. If you show that there's twist and torque and that there are very thin areas where it's twisting, people will understand that, oh, it's actually quite thin, it's just wide. So I can see, when I see it from one side, it's almost, it's paper thin, and then when I flip it over, I can see, oh, it's, it's a piece of paper or whatever. So give people visual cues to that so they understand. Oh, here I think I tried to put like some paint or something on the armor just to fool around and see how it looked, but it didn't look right. Give her kind of like rosary beads. Some little pearls or studs on her collar. And what I'm doing here is I'm flipping the canvas for compositional purposes. I'm trying to make sure the composition looks good. If it doesn't look good from one flip, then it means it doesn't actually look good on the other flip. I'm just used to it at that point. So once again, flip your canvas often. Here I'm working with levels and color balance because I've been making a lot of alterations. I need to make sure that the painting stays in good contrast. And here I have to fix the arm for the exact reason I was just talking about, which is I've been constantly widening her. But the arm is more horizontally posed than the rest of her, so it's going to get distorted more strongly. What I just did there was using a normal layer. I added some aerial perspective to make the sword appear further behind her rather than it was like stabbing into her side or something. And I think this part's done. Now, I sent this to the client. He said, I absolutely love it. Can you throw a background in there? Now, that's actually kind of a tough request because when you work on a painting like this, you're thinking about this single character. You're not thinking about incorporating them into a background of any kind. So part of the problem I had now was that, okay, I've got this great character, and they work by themselves, but how the heck do I put them into a background now? You know, I wasn't planning on having a background. So this actually was a little bit more challenging than I had anticipated, but it still happened. I mean, it had to happen. He was paying me. But anyway, we've essentially located character. She's facing towards us. It would be really awkward to have her off to like a 1/3 or golden ratio. Normally, when you have figures in a scene, they're at the 1/3 mark. So they'll be 1/3 from the left or 1/3 from the right. Centrally located things can be very awkward and hard to pull off because they're really intense. There's really nowhere else for you to look. You have to look right at them. It's kind of like when someone's staring you down. You're like, oh, like I don't really want to look at you. This is weird. So that's kind of how centrally composed paintings can be. In this case, I was already sort of locked into that because I had designed her to be centrally located. I mean, she's balanced, right? She's not. She's posed kind of dynamically, but she's not. You know, she's weighted centrally. It's not like she's in movement towards one direction or the other. So I had to have her centrally looking. So since I already had a yellow background, I thought, all right, well, I guess we'll do like a desert or something, because deserts are yellow. And I'm obviously very creative. So creative that that's the only thing I could think of. But anyway, I decided to do a desert, and I didn't really know what I'd have in the desert because inquisitorial people don't just wander the desert. Like inquisitors occasionally go to the desert, you know, if they're looking for artifacts or someone hiding out or something, but they don't really just chill in the desert all the time. So I needed something to be there, so you'll see what I did. Also, right now I'm using just the brush tool to make perspective lines. It's very easy to do. All you do is you click once in the center, and then you click out, and then there's a couple ways you can do it. You can just keep doing that very quickly, or you can duplicate one of those radii coming off from the center, the vanishing point. You can duplicate it, transform it, so make sure that your axis rotation is the center versus the middle of the line, and then just like transform, like make it rotate 5 degrees or something. And if you hit Shift Control Alt T, I believe, it will duplicate that transformation on a new layer. So you'll get this entire array that spins around the center very easily and very quickly to do. And it will be completely equally distant. Everything will be perfectly matched out. So that's the fastest way I know to do it. It's very quick and dirty, but it works. Okay, so anyway, since she's an Inquisitor, Inquisitors are all into torture and stuff, I figured we'd have some rows of gibbets. And what are gibbets? Well, gibbets are like gallows, except they're worse, I think. A gallow, for those who don't know, is a device used for hanging people by the neck until they die. And it's normally when you kill someone on a gallows, the weight of their fall, or the force of their fall, breaks their necks. They die instantly. It's actually fairly humane. In a more cruel situation, you give them a short rope, and they don't have enough distance to fall, and they don't generate enough momentum, so they don't break their neck. Instead, they strangle to death. or they, you know, they suffer from internal hemorrhaging and they die that way. They get a crushed trachea or something. And then there's another form of being killed by hanging, which is really, really bad, which is when you give them too long of a rope, which is actually, I'm not sure if it's the worst one, if it's better or worse than strangulation, but if the rope is too long, there's too much force from the fall, and the head will actually be ripped clean off, or partially off, which is really bad. So, believe it or not, being a hangman back in the day was actually a very important task, because if you messed up, the people who you were executing would really, really pay. I mean, more than just being killed, they'd die in an agonizing fashion, and they'd suffer tremendously before they died. So, there actually is a science to hanging people, believe it or not. But back on track. The difference between a gibbet and a gallows is that gallows are for hanging people. Gibbets are for hanging people in cages, which are known as gibbets. And rather than being killed instantly in an ideal hanging situation, people in the gibbets, or in these iron cages, they die from exposure or from starvation, which is really not a good way to go. Essentially, you are locked in this cage, which is hung over the ground, and you're just left there. So you have no food, you have nowhere to go to the bathroom. Normally, they're too small for you to squat in, so it's very uncomfortable. You have to like stand all the time, which is extremely tiring, and actually your body will start to torture itself if you cannot sit or stand completely. There's a very cruel device, I don't remember the name of it, but it's essentially this box, which is it's too narrow for you to crouch or sit, but it's not tall enough for you to stand. So you have to stay in this sort of like awkward crouched position, and it's so unnatural of a position that your body will start spasming, the muscles start spasming in agony, and it's a form of torture in itself. You actually don't need to inflict harm on people; their bodies will actually torture the person by itself. But gibbets are really bad because normally people in gibbets die from hypothermia if it's a cold place, dehydration if it's a warm place, or you can also die from dehydration in cold places, but or maybe just animals come and peck at you, or nasty stuff happens. So gibbets are very cruel. They're actually pretty terrifying. They're kind of like a form of propaganda almost. Like if you mess with me, you're gonna die in a really bad way. But the Inquisition is all about that, so it makes sense that they'd have rows of gibbets. And that was a very long-winded explanation for not that complex of a thing. Alright, so we got these poor saps who are probably dead. They're pretty dead. And they're just hanging in the gibbets because they've got nothing else to do. And you can see I'm not really spending a lot of time on these guys. I'm really just sort of getting the idea of them across. Also notice how the gibbets are sort of, they're not all perfectly lined up. They're all sort of kind of angled away, like they've been sort of there for a while, and they've been pushed around by the wind, or they've just sort of slowly sunk one way or the other from gravity or whatever. Whatever forces might be involved. So that's kind of an interesting way to give a narrative without actually using words. And lastly, if there's one thing the Inquisition loves, it is fire. They love fire. So I thought it'd be fitting to have burning braziers of hot coals or something on top. And notice I'm just going to copy and paste this a bunch of times and scale it because that's the easiest way to do it. And I have a lot of them to do, and I don't really feel like painting all of them, so I will copy and paste them. And I have no shame about that because that is the easiest way to do it, and it looks great in the end. And that's all that really matters. Does it look good? And is it fast and easy to do? That is some true talk. Alright, now that we've got the iron kind of brazier cage ready, we gotta do some fire. So how do you do fire in the daytime? Well, Fire in the daytime is actually pretty difficult to depict. Fire is very easily seen at night because it's dark out, but in the daytime, it's very rare for a fire to be brighter than the sun, so that it's going to be like a secondary light. It's going to be darker than a lot of the other lights. So the the thing you see about fire during the day the most is the smoke. So what I'm sort of doing here is I'm playing with that, and that I'm showing where the flame ends by showing where the smoke begins. And don't worry, there'll be some actual flame added, but I didn't want to go overboard with the flame because it is a daytime scene and it is a well-lit scene, so you wouldn't have very intense flames going on. So we got a little bit of orange there. Also, fire in the daytime tends to be very red looking. I'm not sure why that is. Fire is very interesting. There's a lot of factors that affect how flames look, how bright they are, what hues they are, chemical components, what time of day it is, what sort of lighting situation you have. There's all types of stuff that goes into determining what a fire will look like, believe it or not. Alright, so that looks good. So now we've got our chick. She's in a desert. And we've got some gibbets. Okay, cool. So now I'm just throwing some stones or pebbly textures in, like you do, and I'm softening up the horizon to show some aerial perspective. Note, aerial perspective does not mean bird's eye view. Aerial perspective means the amount of crap, essentially, or detritus, or dust, or debris, or just simply air in between you and what you're looking at. So the further something is from you, the more stuff will be there, and the more light will be diffracted and diffused, refracted and diffused. So that's how aerial perspective works. So as things get further away from you, they become less focused, in less contrast, and they tend to take on whatever color the sky is. So if it's a nice blue day out, blue sunny day, things will be blue as they go further away. If you're on like Mars or something, or you have like a red sky, it'll be red as you get further away because there's just more red stuff. So that's why the gibbets that are further away are more faded and they're more kind of yellowy, because we have kind of a yellowy scene. And this building in the background is going to be quite faded and hard to see because there's a lot of, I don't know, it looks like we're in a kind of dusty, sandstormy type environment here. So we just throw a big inquisitorial emblem on the front to make people know, oh, it's an inquisitorial building. Makes sense. Put some little spikes on the top of the building, make it look like a cathedral. Because 40K people love Gothic architecture, so might as well throw it in there. Checking the composition. Now I had to adjust the composition, believe it or not, because even though the posts were lined up correctly, the way that the smoke came off the posts changes the composition. It changes the direction and weight. So I actually had to change the composition a little bit, make it kind of off-center for it to actually look on-center. Very strange, kind of counterintuitive stuff, but okay, here I'm adding some stained glass and some architectural details just using a normal layer, nothing complex. And I'm using aerial perspective to show elements of design in this building, rather than line itself. And there's my lovely signature. A little color balance layer to fix things up, some curves, brightness contrast, just make sure things are nice and saturated, good contrast. A photo filter, believe it or not, give things that warm appearance. Some vibrance to make sure things look saturated. A second brightness contrast layer, this time with a mask, because I'm only working on the sky. And then it looks like I threw in some texture on the ground here. And notice how I'm using the perspective lines to make sure that the ground itself falls into perspective. And I'm using a mask to paint it in where I want it to be. And the textures are using a soft light layer. And then lastly, I'm using a normal layer to just paint in some localized details around her feet. I'm kind of pretending to incorporate the texture of that ground that I just brought in using my normal brush, just sort of making that effect without actually doing it. Now this is one of the hardest parts of a painting, which is deciding when the painting's actually done. Generally it takes a lot of looking, a lot of tweaking, a lot of little adjustment layers here and there, make sure things look right, but it's one of the harder parts, actually. So this painting is done now. It was a real pleasure to work on, so I thank the 11th Company podcast for letting me do it and commissioning me to do it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you learned something. If you didn't, sorry, I tried really hard. But hopefully you learned something. And if you did learn something or you did enjoy it, please do like the video, please subscribe to my channel, and please share it. Your likes, subscriptions, and shares really do help me immensely. I can't thank you enough for doing them. So if you like what I do and you appreciate what I do, please help me out. Lastly, make sure to check out my other videos. If you have more questions about digital painting, a lot of them are answered there. If you have any questions about this painting, please make sure to read the description before you post. Most of the information you're looking for, I guarantee it will be in the description. Last reminder, every Sunday I live stream at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find me on my Twitch TV channel, which will be in the description of this video. If you're interested in my tutoring services, please go to my website, which is nicholask.com. I offer one-on-one tutoring as well as portfolio reviews and group critiques. And of course, if you're interested in having something commissioned, so if you want a painting done for yourself, please send me an email at artist@nicholask.com. We can talk about what you want to have done, what it might cost you, and figure out just how awesome we can make what you want look. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you all soon.